Welcome back. You're watching a special edition of Captains of Industries. We're coming to you from Lagos, Nigeria, speaking to Tony Elumelu, the CEO of United Bank of Africa. Before the break, we were talking about the broader context in which financial services are evolving in Africa, poorly developed capital markets, stringent regulation, often poor regulation. We come from a situation where in the middle of 2009, the newly appointed governor of the Nigerian Central Bank conducted audits of leading financial institutions in this country. Risk management profiles were found to be very, very poor. Managing debt was found to be very, very poor. Depositors were very concerned about their investments. One bank to have walked out of that entire situation, reputation intact, books in the black, and just as credit ratings rising in some instances to a AA+, is United Bank of Africa, and we're joined by its esteemed CEO, Tony Elumelu, who is our guest coming to you from Nigeria. Thank you very much again for being with us. Before the break, we were talking about investing in Africa, the conditions of doing business in Africa, and the fact that UBA has a presence in Europe and also now in China. Many people would say, you know, it's exciting times for the world. The complexion of global trade and business is changing. People see China and India as catalyzing growth. That's the optimism. The pessimism is that's a saturated market, and if you're really, really wise, you shouldn't be going in there because the market in China is full of distortions. What's your response?
The truth is the business between the volume of trade between China and Africa is grown astronomically in the past 18 months, and a lot more will even happen because China is interested in the mineral and the oil potentials in Africa, and we think that will signal a lot more positive development between the Chinese and Africa. And for UBA as Africa's global bank, we thought a representative office in China will help us to orchestrate, intermediate, and broker transactions between trade between Chinese and Africa. And more so given the fact that we're operating about a couple of African countries, again, we need to be seen to be bringing Chinese businesses and African business together. That is the reason for our Chinese presence, and it's been also laced with a further relationship that we developed with the Chinese Development Bank, which helps us to, gives us opportunity and access to the huge deposit base of Chinese Development Bank in supporting developmental programs in Africa.
Okay, and facilitating that relationship with China, especially because Chinese investments are now somewhere in the region of $100 billion. They're the biggest investor in Africa. What are your views of the Chinese investor per se? People say they're amoral. They bring in their own skills, their own pool of talent, their own money. They reap from Africa, but they sow very little.
I'm not a politician, but as CEO of UBA, given the relationship with Chinese, I'd like to say that I hold a slightly different viewpoint, and I'd like to share with you our own experience. When we signed the agreement with China Development Bank 2 years ago, they thought that they should help us in building skills and competencies. And one of the things they did was to ask us to nominate someone to come and study Mandarin, come and do an MBA in China, and also that if given the level of relationship we want to build between the two institutions, it would be nice for some Nigerians to come there, expense everything paid by them. We have our people there now studying MBA there, UBA staff. Those staff will now drive further the relationship between the China Development Bank and United Bank of Africa. If you therefore ask me the nature of relationship, is it symbiotic? Is it, I would say yes.
Okay, so you're Tony Elumelu, not the politician, the CEO who's received numerous accolades and laurels for the work that you've done. Your personal philosophy in leading UBA, in living this life, what guides you? What inspires you?
You know, basically, we think that this generation of Africans should try to create enduring institutions. Or there are people, when you talk of Africa, people think of poverty, war, famine, etc. We would like to see an African corporate, an African institution that competes with Microsoft, with Citibank, with HSBC, And you know, the journey of Citibank, HSBC did not start today. It started decades ago, but they were driven by a certain common vision, purpose, consistency. This is the direction. And so to us, we're trying to build a UBA to last, a UBA that would help to catalyze economic development and growth across Africa.
I want to challenge you on that one. That's your vision as an individual, as a corporate leader. In this quest to create Africa Incorporated, unfortunately, is this dimension of the state. The state in Africa perceived to be very dysfunctional or less so ineffective. You operate in Nigeria primarily. Repeated power outages, a real problem in terms of energy security, which must add to the costs of doing business for you. What do you think can be done in terms of forging a relationship between the government and the private sector to overcome a lot of these infrastructure projects that are problems that are adding to the cost of doing business and that are beyond your control and your personal vision?
No, the truth is we have environmental and institutional factors that could affect our ability to achieve our objectives. But I believe that a country and the society gets the kind of leadership they deserve. And in truth, the private sector has a role to play. We need to come sit down with government, influence government, and get things done. If you look at the history of America and the development of the railways in America, they're done largely public-private partnership. If you read the House of Morgan, people left the US, Southern America, came to Europe to raise money to support that. So we have a role to play. But for us, institutional rigidities and infrastructural deficiencies should not be a sufficient justification for not achieving our objectives. Because we see that in that inadequacy and problem, you can create a competitive advantage. Competitive advantage that distinguishes you from others. Everybody has power problem, outage problem, everybody has transportation problem. How did you or have you as an institution developed yourself to live with that problem while focusing on the objective you want to achieve? And how also are you working with all stakeholders to see a better tomorrow as it relates to those infrastructural deficiencies, etc. I'll talk about. And so for UBA, we are thinking seriously along this line, and we're actually indeed doing things. And we have an infrastructure development desk, and we're working with government to see how we can support it, not just in Nigeria, across Africa.